Hi everyone. So in lesson 10.6, we're going to learn about radians. So remember when we were doing trig stuff, I said to make sure your calculator was in degrees, not radians. So now we're finally going to learn what it means to be in radians. So radians are just another way to measure angles. Okay, so one trip around the circle is 360. In radians, that is equal to 2 pi. Okay, so 2 pi is equivalent to 360. So one trip around the circle in radians is equal to 2 pi. So the definition of radians is that it's the ratio of the length of the arc and its radius. Okay, and like I said, we use them to measure angles. One trip around is 360 or 2 pi. So when we're doing radians, we don't use a symbol for it. Okay, so if the pi isn't there, I know that you're going to be like, oh, this is just a number, but it's actually radians. I know with angles we use a degree mark, but we could just say 3 and that would be in radians with it the pi multiplied out. But most of the time when you see the radians, it's going to have the pi present, not necessarily all the time. So like I said before, it's the ratio of the length of the arc and the radius. So if the radius is equal to, those would be equal, then it would be 1 radian. Okay, so basically what we're going to focus on today is converting between radians and degrees. So if we were in radians and we wanted to change it to degrees, we would multiply by 180 over pi. Okay, degrees don't have the pi in them usually, so we're canceling out the pi that's present by putting it in the denominator. Okay, so if we're going from degrees to radians, then we would multiply by pi over 180. So one way to think about it is whatever the one that you're trying to get rid of goes in the bottom. Okay, so here we're converting to degrees, so that means that the pi is in the bottom because we're getting rid of the pi and we're going back to degrees. So the degrees is in the top. What you want is in the top. So for number 1, we would multiply by 180 over pi since we're converting to degrees. Okay, so we just multiply straight across. So 9 times 180 is 1,620. And then 4 times pi is 4 pi. So since we have a pi in the denominator and numerator, we can cancel those out. And then do this division. Hopefully it comes out to a whole number. Sometimes it won't. But 1,620 divided by 4 ends up being 405 degrees. So when you're doing this, make sure you put your degree sign. Because if not, then it's assumed that it's in radians. Okay, so to get rid of radians, we multiply by 180 over pi. So let's try example 3 because this one's a little different. It doesn't have the pi in it, but it's still in radians. Okay, remember it doesn't have a degree sign, it's in radians. So we're still going to multiply by 180 over pi. So if we multiply straight across, we would have 765 over pi. Since we're trying to get rid of the radians, we're actually going to divide it out in your calculator. So you're going to get a decimal when you divide by pi. We're going to round to 2 decimal places. So if we do 765 divided by pi, that's going to be approximately 243.51 degrees. Okay. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to try example 2 and 4 on this half and convert those radians into degrees. So pause your video and do example 2 and 4. Okay, so we got negative 150 on this one. We just carry that negative sign over. Okay, so negative 150 degrees. And then for number 4, we get 165 degrees. So let's try converting to radians. So if we want to get rid of the degrees and go to radians, we put the degrees in the bottom. So this time we're going to multiply by pi over 180. So we multiply straight across, we get 45 pi over 180. Make sure you don't write the degree sign, they cross each other out, they cancel. Okay, so from here, we just have to try to reduce our fraction. So we're in radians now. The rest is just reducing. So what can we divide 45 and 180 by? Good, we can divide the GCF, the greatest common factor, is 45. So we end up with pi over 4. Okay, so let's do number 3 together. So times by pi over 180. So we end up with 108 pi, or 108 pi over 180. And then we try to reduce it. So we can divide the top and the bottom by 36. So we end up with 3 pi over 5. And that's our equivalent in radians. Okay, so go ahead and try example 2 and 4, and then we'll go over them together. Okay, so for 2, we times by pi over 180. We end up with negative 3 pi over 2. You can divide that by 90. Okay, in example number 4, we times by pi over 180. We end up with 249.8 pi over 180. So for this one, since it was a decimal, I just times out the pi and got an approximation value for it. I didn't leave the pi in it, just kind of like how number 3 didn't have a pi in it on the other side. Okay, so sometimes we're not going to have the pi in it, but usually radians will have the pi. Since your calculator is really smart, it could have reduced that for you, 249.8 divided by 180, and it can make it a fraction. So that would be the same as 249 pi over 900, which is just kind of ridiculous. So that's why I changed it to a decimal. So you have to remember, though, when you're changing it to a decimal, you got to times that by pi. Okay, so that's where I got the 4.36. I rounded. Okay, so that's it to convert between radians and degrees. Werner out.